Good morning from Canberra, Australia. So I'd like to welcome you to the panel today, which is courtesy of Hacking HR. So today we're going to dive into a topic that really resonates deeply, really with all professional spheres. I think it carries profound personal impact. So interpersonal acumen, influencing others with emotional and social intelligence. What an amazing topic. So, I'll bring the panelists through. And good morning to Jess and Jennifer. Really looking forward to our conversation today. So would you like to just introduce yourself, Jess, and what's important to this topic for yourself?
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. Hi, my name is Jess Goldberg. I'm an executive coach and leadership instructor, and I also teach communication skills at Columbia University. And this is an incredibly important topic for me. Being able to have emotional intelligence and social intelligence in the workplace is critical. It will make and break our experience and what we're able to do and what we're capable of. So I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper in today about what this is and how you all can develop it a little bit more.
And Jennifer, how about yourself?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Nash. I am based in Austin, Texas, and like Jess, I'm also an executive coach, and I'm an author and a consultant and a keynote speaker. And I'm very excited to be here today and talking with everyone about the importance of influencing through emotional and social intelligence.
Thank you, Jess and Jennifer. So maybe just so to get started, let's just start with some basic definitions. So what does it mean to influence others with emotional and social intelligence? How would you like to start with that, Jennifer?
I'm happy to kick it off. Emotional intelligence and social intelligence, I'll first start by defining that for me. And what that means is emotional intelligence is our ability to understand and be aware of our own emotions and be able to shift and change those. Social intelligence is the ability to be aware of someone else's emotions and then the ability to shift and change them. So influence is really our ability to be able to change someone's behavior or belief based upon our ability to read and understand what's going on for them.
Wow, I really love that. And Jennifer?
Yeah, so, just to build on a little bit of what Jess said, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, there are actually 4 domains of emotional intelligence. There are the EI dimensions, which are self-awareness, self-management, and there's the social intelligence dimensions, which are social awareness and relationship management. And within each of those, there are different competencies that you can build. Emotional intelligence has 5 competencies, and the social intelligence has 7.
Okay, well, that's maybe leads into the next question. So how do you tap into emotional intelligence to pick up on social cues in person, and particularly there's so much remote work. So what's different maybe with in person and remote as well, so we can build effective relationships at work to get that influence? We'd like to have a start of that one.
Rod, can you repeat the question again for us?
Yeah. So how do you tap into your emotional intelligence to pick up on social cues? So there's in person and in remote. So like the 2 elements, how do you pick on the social cues and obviously then to help you influence others? So what are some of the social cues and how do you pick up on them, essentially, is the question.
So I can take a stab at that first. In terms of the social cues, you can be looking at someone language to see, are they comfortable in this space? And whether you're remote or whether you're live in person, those are things that you can be observing while, the other person is talking. So for example, perhaps they have their arms crossed in front of their chest. Well, that could mean that maybe they're cold, but it could also mean that maybe they're not so open to hearing what you have to say. So understanding that some of these nonverbal cues could be helping give you insight into what the person is feeling or thinking, and helping you put yourself in their shoes to understand them a little bit better.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jeff.
that's great. That's great, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that. I think another thing that's really important is being able to slow down. So often in the workplace, we're moving so fast that we're not able to register what's actually going on. So when we can slow down our pace in which we're speaking, the how fast we're moving with someone else, that will give us more space to be able to be aware and allow our awareness to be able to show up about what's going on. So we can slow down. And then the other thing to do is so often many of us are focused our own attention on ourselves. We're focused on our emotions within ourselves. So it's hard to recognize what's going on for someone else because we might have anxiety, we might have these thoughts, and we're thinking about our own experience rather than putting our attention on the other person. So a simple way of doing that is just starting to direct your attention to presence on the other person. That's, maintaining eye contact, being able to slow down, and then asking questions. Sometimes, it might be hard to read someone because their body language might not match what they're saying. So being able to slow down and ask more questions of them is going to help you be able to read them better and understand, especially in a digital landscape where we can't see their full body. We can't see all of their body language. So being able to verbally directly ask them more specifically about what's going on for them is going to make it easier for you to be able to read them.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Some really great insights there. And I'm just wondering, so when you start, like we've just started a virtual meeting now, how do you really tap into that at the start of the session? What are some ideas and suggestions before you get into the meat of a meeting? Sometimes just what's some ideas for that?
Yeah, well, I think like Jess said, just asking questions like, how is everybody doing today? Like you can also have something up on the screen that just simply says like, welcome, and sort of creating that inviting environment for people. And they know that they are, that this is a space where, you're excited to see them. And that can change the emotional tenor of a room as well. So just setting up a few simple things in the beginning of the meeting can help you set the tone and the emotional tenor for that meeting.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's great. I love that. And I think, there's ways in which we can even verbalize that emotional tenor and being able to figure out what's going on for people. So one thing I like to do is before meetings, especially some meeting that might feel heavier or more intense or more stressful, I will try and regulate myself first. So that might be doing a simple few deep breaths. It might be, drawing my attention to my two fingers and just placing my attention on my two fingers as I rub them together so that I can know that my attention is there and not on all the emotions and feelings that I might be feeling. And then once the meeting starts, one thing I've liked to do with a lot of my employees before is doing a, red, yellow, green. How are you doing today? You don't have to give me all the details about what's going on in your life, but just give me a color coding of where you're coming in at today. And that can help you gauge, sometimes someone might say that they are on an orange day, and that gives you a little bit more context. Okay, maybe it's not what I'm doing. Maybe there's something going on that's at home for them. And you can just have a little bit holding that in context of the day.
Thanks for that. So now just picking up on, I think one of the things that one of you said was, how does active listening then play a role in effective relationships and influencing others? So what are some things we do there?
Rod, did you say effective listening?
Active
You're
listening,
breaking up
sorry.
a little bit. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really, how does active listening play a role in this building effective relationships and influencing others? Like, how's that so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can jump in on this one. Active listening is critical, is a very crucial and fundamental skill to be able developing your emotional and social intelligence. And why this is so important is because when you are able to truly listen to someone else and allow them to feel heard, they're going to not only feel more connected to you, they're going to feel heard, they're going to feel seen, and they're going to be far more likely to be able to negotiate with you and follow your lead, especially if you're a leader. And the way that we actively listen is really by slowing down, by not thinking about how do I tell them the idea or the project that I want them to work on, but how do I actually understand what's going on for them in this moment? And that's just by asking more questions and listening and then repeating back what they said to you exactly as they said it. And that is really what is the magic. It seems so simple and so crazy to repeat back exactly what they said. But when someone doesn't feel heard, when they don't feel like their voice is being expressed and they're hearing them, they're going to go on these rambling monologues and they're never going to stop until you show them that you've heard what they said. And it can be as simple as being like, it sounds like you said, and then you want to build a new website for this company. Did I hear you right? And then they'll say yes. And then you can dive in a layer deeper, listen, respond back exactly what they said with just a simple question at the end. And that will help you guide it along and really help them feel like they're being seen and heard. And then it will give you far more power to be able to shift and change their belief or their behavior from that if they felt heard first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
really.
think, this magic of like active listening is so important, right? And in my book, I actually talk about the 3 levels of listening. And I know, Jess, you're super familiar with this, as a coach. So when we talk about active listening, there is this there's 3 levels of listening. So the first level of listening is when you're listening to someone say something and you're already formulating the response that you're going to have. So your attention really isn't focused on them. Your attention is focused on your inner world, and like that that stream of conversation that you have going on in your head. You're already framing what your response is going to be. That second level of listening goes just a little bit deeper. You're hearing what they're saying, but you are refraining, you're emotionally controlling yourself to not respond until they're done speaking. And then you're paraphrasing, like Jess is talking about, and asking them to repeat what they've said so that they're ensure that they feel heard and understood. And that third level of listening is actually around the context, like what's going on in the room. Is it noisy in the room? What's the temperature of the room feel like? What are some of the other data points that you're getting from the environment around you that can help build that context and give you more insight into how this person is feeling and what they are thinking? And so when you listen, you can listen not only with your ears, but you can also listen with the different senses that you have to create some more of that contextual awareness.
Wow, there's some really good answers there, and yeah, I think it is so important, isn't it? I'm loving the whole slow down, yeah, and just take in what's being shared. And I'm wondering, so just extending this just a little bit is, so when you're in I think it's easier maybe to do the active listening and reflecting back when you're maybe one-on-one in a small group, like we're a small group right now. I'm wondering, what are some of the differences of active listening when you're in a group of, say 10 people that you're working with and you're trying to influence a group? What would be some differences there that you'd apply?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things you can do, first of all, is just pay attention to who is talking and who is not
Mhm.
talking, right? I think we've all been in those meetings where, there's someone who sort of takes over, it takes out all the air in the room because they constantly talk. And then there are a lot of people who don't get a chance to speak or don't get a chance to be heard, like Jess was saying. And so paying attention to, who's contributing, who's not contributing, in a larger group like that can make a big difference to the ideas that are shared within the group. One of the other things I have found that's super helpful when I'm having a big group facilitation is to prepare the agenda ahead of time and let people take a look at that so that people who are processing internally have a chance to think about that and reflect and soak on it before they come into the meeting. So when they get to the meeting, they are prepared and they have their key talking points that they'd like to share.
I love that, Jen. I love the idea of making sure it's so important to make sure to list who is taking up space, who is not, who's speaking, who's not. That's so critical. And if you as an HR leader are the one leading a meeting and you're trying to figure out, what's a direction forward that we're going to move on, I love the idea of making sure that we have a full, agenda ahead of time. And then as you are running the meeting, what's really important is sometimes those voices that are not heard as often, calling on those people, asking them, what's your opinion on this? And then, as we were talking about before, you re-say what they've said so that you amplify that voice for the whole group. And it's really important that the voices that you feel like you want to make sure are heard, that you amplify them, that you repeat back. So you repeat back exactly what they said and amplify it, and make sure that you still give credit to that person. Because so often when we try and amplify, sometimes we accidentally don't give credit. So make sure that you give credit to the person and amplify their voice. And that's going to make people feel more likely and more invested in your leadership style when they feel like you've heard them and you've amplified them.
Well, again, I love both your answers there. I think I need to take you to my group meetings.
And I think I will just add, I think I will build on that just a tiny bit. So, in terms of that amplification, I think, a lot of us, especially women, have been in the room where, I think Jess is alluding to this, right? Where there's been an idea shared. And later on in the meeting, someone else brings up the same idea. And perhaps it wasn't the same gendered person. And so being able to amplify that the first time it comes up and helping share that so that the credit is giving to the person who actually said the idea first can go a long way towards helping people feel valued and feel that they matter in that space.
Yeah, that's so critical.
Yeah, that is good. And in fact, so I was in a group meeting yesterday, so I'll take this a little bit further. And I was going in a group meeting where some of the participants don't want to go in the direction that that was being spoken about. So when you know that you're going into a meeting with people that might have a closed mind, what else do you do to try and bridge that, to actually get them to be engaged? What's my ideas there?
Yeah, I think it's always interesting, right? Like Jesse, there's always going to be people that are maybe, resistant to what is going on. And so the emotional and social intelligence here and influencing them through that, I think becomes even more important. So I think as Jess said, like a very first thing, like, why is it that they have resistance to this particular direction? Maybe they're in one of those 6 hats from De Bono, right? Maybe they're the person who is bringing up the devil's advocate role and pointing out all of the risks and wanting to protect the company or whatever it is from, going in that direction. So being sure that you hear what these people also have to say, even though they're maybe not on board and going that same direction, can give you some other data points and help inform the decision overall so that it is the best choice or best fit decision for the organization moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to make sure that when someone's not on board, we understand the reason why. And we don't just understand the surface layer, but we really dive deeper for what is that reason why they're pushing back. And then we make sure that we acknowledge that we've heard what their reason is so that they feel heard on that. And then we explain why we're going in the other direction. And we give explanation and detailed understanding and how it aligns to the company goals or the company's direction so that the person can follow along on why. And you can explain to them and then collaborate with them if there are any parts of their current idea that you could bring into this way that you're moving forward. Maybe you can't go exactly in the direction that they wanted, but maybe there is some grain of truth of something that they're pushing back on that you need to look at seriously and consider. And maybe you can weave that into that new plan, and that's going to make them far more invested in following along if they feel like they were heard and there's some part of what they were saying is being brought into this future plan. Because normally when someone's pushing back very strongly, there is some grain of truth, and it's on you to look at it seriously on what part is actually true there.
Yeah.
I think, both your answers are pretty amazing. Once again, I think what you're saying is try and be in the other person's shoes. Make sure you're not making assumptions. Discover what their underlying issues are, or what what their interests are. And then if you can bring it up a level, that can help get that alignment.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go back to something that Jess said, because I think there's a really, really important piece in there. It's like helping uncover the why someone is resistant to the change, and then helping them understand what is going to occur if the change doesn't happen versus what will happen. So, for example, when I was working at Ford Motor Company back in the early 2000s, there was this time when the company was not doing very well at all. And there was a big town hall, and this one of the leaders came on, and they did a conversation with us. And I remember distinctly, still to this day, the leader coming on and saying, "Look, we have to change or we'll die." And so it was very, very clear at that moment, like, even though these changes that were being proposed were uncomfortable, people, weren't sure about how they fit into this new world, with the changes. But what they did understand at that point was that if they didn't move forward with the change, that there maybe wouldn't be a job there and a company there for them to come to the next day. So I think being really helpful and clear about what it is that's creating the requirement for that change can also help people understand. And then digging into those questions about why there might be resistance, helping them understand where they fit, what are the impacts to their role, and helping them see how they fit into that picture going forward can also help decrease some of that resistance.
No, it's really good. So I guess what are the steps we can take to really build this emotional and social intelligence across the broader organization? So if I'm a HR leader, how do I help grow that in my organization? What are some ideas there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the first ways is starting to recognize it in yourself, starting to slow down, be more aware of your own emotions and how they are playing out. The second is to start asking more questions, as we talked about. Another is to start asking for more constructive feedback. So asking people on how you are showing up, getting more feedback will allow you to understand and really be open to that feedback, because it can, not everyone's going to be delicate in how they're going to give you your feedback, but it's going to give you a lot of insights into how you're showing up and how you might be having behaviors that are negatively impacting people that you don't even realize it. So when you are impacting someone or having some negative impacts on someone, you're not going to be able to influence them as well. So if you can ask for feedback, be able to understand the ways in which you're operating, and then work on changing those, that's going to be critical. And then I would also recommend, really look into reading more resources about how you can improve yourself. Taking courses, Jennifer mentioned she has a book. I have a course. Like, there are lots of resources out there for all of you if you want to develop these skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, we have, there's lots of research that shows that our emotional vocabulary is actually quite limited. When you hear about, there's only usually 3 words that people have in their emotional vocabulary: mad, sad, and glad. And, there are lots of resources that can help you, you know, increase the size of your vocabulary from an emotional standpoint, so you can actually get to what you are feeling. Because a lot of times we have so many different feelings going on that we're not really sure like what it is, and it all just feels like this jumble. So getting a little bit more clear about the different words in your vocabulary that can help expand the repertoire of what you're feeling can also help you start to figure out, where am I on this emotional and social intelligence spectrum, right? Where are my skills at currently? Like, there's a lot of different assessments you can also take to figure out like where your skills lie today. So there's something called the ESCI assessment. It's ESCI. There's a lot of free ones out there as well. There's the VIA character strengths. And you can also take the Human Leader Index, which is an index that I created for my book. So I think also, like Jess had mentioned, ask for feedback from people. Ask them to tell you like what are the behaviors that you're exhibiting that maybe are, not helping you be as successful as you could be. And then maybe you engage a coach to help you work through some of those behaviors and shift that behavior to something that's serving you in a better space. there's a lot of books like Jess had mentioned that you can reference. One of them is by Daniel Goleman, who is like considered the father of emotional intelligence. He has many books out there. This one is particularly on working with emotional intelligence. And like we're talking about on our topic today, this one is on social intelligence. So I would highly recommend both of those if you're looking for a resource that will be helpful for you to build your emotional intelligence awareness and competency.
Yeah, that's great, Jen. There's one more thing that I want to double click on that you were talking about, which is your emotional vocabulary. So there's a term called emotional granularity, which means our ability to understand where on a spectrum our emotion is. And there's a lot of science that backs up that when we have more words to describe whether we are furious or whether we're angry, that will give us more ability to be able to know how can we regulate ourselves. It'll give us more understanding of what are the things I need to do to be able to help work through this. How mad am I actually about this? Do I need to go confront that person? Or is it something internally that I just need to regulate myself on and it's just a small trigger? And the more vocabulary that we have, the more ability that we're able to know where on the spectrum our emotion is, the more we're going to be able to regulate ourselves, deal with it, and then make a wise choice on what our next action should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And there's a lot of tools out there that you can use for that, right? So Plutchik has a wheel of emotions where it's actually not only labeled with like the words, but it's also labeled with the color. So from a color psychology standpoint, which color goes with anger, right? And most of us would think, well, maybe red. And then other people might think, well, what color goes with calm or peaceful? And that could be a blue kind of color. So Plutchik actually gives you that from a visual intelligence standpoint, as well as the textual version. There's also almost like a periodic table of the elements kind of looking chart from Mark, and I'm blanking on his last name right now. He's at Yale, and he developed the ruler study where he goes in and does that with kids in elementary school to help them build their emotional vocabulary. But maybe we'll have a chance. I can send that out later if I can find the name of it from Mark. But his book Brackett, it's Mark Brackett at Yale who developed that one.
Thanks, Jess and Jennifer. Maybe extending on that one a little bit more, and maybe talk about your own course that you run. I'm just really curious. So if you're talking to, like we have a number of HR leaders that are listening to us now, if you were going to be helping them roll it out to their organization, like how would you do that? Like what's the best way of trying to grow that to an organizations of hundreds of people, so versus just talking to the one-on-one person? How would you do that? What some ideas for an HR leader?
I do a lot of that right now in my work, where I go into organizations, we assess the company culture, I figure out what are the key problems, where psychological safety is and where it is not, where is awareness and where there is not, and I kind of assess and do a company culture assessment, and then I'll run training programs so that everyone has the same language within the company. It's really great when everyone has the same tools and same language to speak about things. So I have this framework that I have for giving effective feedback. And when everyone is taught on the same framework and has the same language for how they're approaching feedback, then when people are receiving it, they understand what's happening and they're able to receive it much better. So sometimes within an organization, either you as the HR leader can do it yourself, where you can kind of run a training where everyone gets on the same page, or you can bring in outside facilitators like myself, where we can come in and we can kind of give everyone that same language so that it becomes much easier for people to collaborate and work together. And that can be really critical to be able to give people all the same tools and skills to be able to communicate well together.
I really like that. Thanks, Jess. Jennifer, have you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think, very similar to Jess, I have workshops that I do in organizations to help them build that emotional and social intelligence capability. I have the Human Leader Index. It's complimentary that people can go out and take. It's at my website, drjennifernash.com. that will help give everyone a starting point of, where do they fall on this emotional intelligence spectrum? And then where are, targeting the key areas of their strengths, targeting where they have opportunity. And then there's some workbook exercises in the report that they get that will help them start to dive into that. And I find often that organizations use that, from a peer group perspective, where, maybe HR has put together, groups of leaders or leaders of leaders who are looking to build these skills, not only in themselves, but in the people that they lead as well.
So, and then maybe going a bit further with that, and with your book, I'm really curious. So we're lucky to have you here. You've got a book. Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so Be Human, Lead Human, you can see it back here on the
Yeah.
banner, is a book that I wrote to help organizations prioritize people to power performance. And the way that they can do that is through the humans framework, which I describe in the book. So when Jess started talking earlier about how, it's so important that we help people feel seen and we help them feel heard and we help them feel understood, those are some of the key elements that are in the humans framework. And so my book dives into a very deep dive on each of those elements and how do we help people feel heard? How do we help people feel understood? What do those things even mean? And then giving them some concrete tools and actions that they can take, and also highlighting some of the behaviors that maybe get in the way of those. And I do that through case studies. So people can read that and go, oh, I think maybe I was exhibiting that behavior the other day. And like we talked about earlier, asking around for feedback. Hey, like, we were in this meeting together today. Did you notice, that I exhibited this behavior, or I didn't take the opportunity to exhibit this behavior? What could I do differently going forward? So the book is set up to be an invitation to create a strategic action plan. It walks you through that entire space. And then at the end, it gives you tools to execute on that plan.
Thanks. That's real. Yeah, it sounds really amazing. Okay, so for yourself, to what extent does influencing through emotional and social intelligence impact business results? So what's some of your actual personal experiences or case studies that you could share with the people listening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's critical. And I wrote a LinkedIn post about this yesterday. So you all are welcome to go look at the graphic that I created. But I have a graphic in which I call it the nature of influence. It's a chart in which we can see how influence works. How do we get people to follow us, especially over long periods of time? And what I've found through working with thousands of leaders is that when we are relationship oriented, it starts slow and it takes some time, but over time, it compounds over time, and we're able to get far more people following us than when we are short-term goal-oriented. So when we are trying to persuade someone to believe our point of view or work on a project that we really want them to work on, when we push too hard in the short term and we try to get them to follow our ideas, they might follow in, but then have a little bit of resentment on that. And so you might get short-term spike of influence, but long-term you will lose them following you. And so it's really important for leaders to be able to think about, how do I build strong emotional and social intelligence so that I can build strong relationships, trust, and collaboration with people so that they will follow my lead in the long term. They'll stay with my company for the long term. They'll stay working for me for the long term. And they'll follow even if they aren't 100% sure of my idea. If they have trust in you, they're going to be far more likely to follow along with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that story, and I'm excited to go see your LinkedIn post, Jess, about that. So one of the stories I'll share around, how does, ESI influence and impact business outcomes? I was working at Ford Motor Company, and we had a new CEO come in, Alan Mullally. And Alan was a very different leader than what we had had before. He came from the airplane industry, and coming into automotive, he was seen as sort of an outsider. And so Alan had a very different way of doing things. And so he was really signaling to the culture that, hey, things are going to be different here. And, the company was in a very difficult situation at that time where we were losing $17 billion. And so he, came into his, meeting the one morning and he said, look, everything on this chart is green. Like that means that everything is going well. He's like, but we're losing $17 billion. Isn't there like one small thing that's not working well? And, so he started, like Jess had said earlier, right? He starts asking questions. And, everyone around the table is a little hesitant to actually share the real story because culturally that wasn't how things worked before, right? The messenger would tend to get shot. And so, Alan was very patient, right? He was waiting, he was building that trust with people. And, eventually they started to see that, oh, this is a safe space, right? Building that psychological trust, psychological safety. I am able to, share the challenges that I'm having, like in my business unit, without fear of retribution or fear of losing my job, and knowing that the people around this table are going to be helping me, right? And so, how did Alan make this change? Well, he created this culture of psychological safety, where jokes at other people's expense were not allowed, and he encouraged everyone to adhere to these behaviors that he had set out in his messaging when he first took over in office. And so everyone had these messages on their little ID, right? It would sit on like this little tab, and so you'd badge into the building, and on this little badge you'd have on one side it said like one, and then on the other side it said Ford, and it had all the different behaviors that he was implementing in the culture. And so everyone had the behaviors, they all knew what was expected, and they all knew that, this way of communicating and collaborating with one another was the new way forward. And so, eventually people got on board. Eventually they were able to, adopt this new way of working together. And at the end of the day, the increase in stock price was 1,837%. So when people ask me about, well, this is really soft and fluffy stuff, right? And I'm sure, Jess, I'm sure you hear that a lot as well, that, oh, this is just, these are the soft skills. Like, we don't need to focus on this. We really need to work in the technical skills. I always point them to this story because it's one of the best examples I have of the immense impact that emotional and social intelligence can have through influence in an organization.
I love that story, Jen. So powerful. And I want to double click on that with another story that you actually reminded me of, which is that Google, a long time ago, about 10 years ago, they did a study to figure out what made their best performing teams best. Yeah. And they studied on all these different metrics. And they wanted to figure out what teams were the most innovative and why were they the most innovative. And the surprising thing that they discovered was the thing that made the teams the best of the best teams at Google were the ones who had psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And that is critical for innovation. When people feel safe to share their opinions, share their ideas, share the problems with the company, and also share their, maybe quirky but out of the box ideas, when they feel safe to do so, when they feel safe to express their frustrations with other employees, they are going to be far more innovative, creative, and are going to propel productivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what you're sharing. And I think that, when people can just be themselves, so if you can be yourself and you can show yourself, that's really the ideal, isn't it? And you can do that when you're doing what you're talking about, just creating that safe environment. And I love what you're saying before, Jess, that it's got to be, well, I think what I heard you say is that you need to be consistent. You can put these aims, these new way of working in place, but you need, everybody to be on board, I think is what I think of heard you say. And everyone should hold themselves accountable as well to that as well. So be consistent, get some agreements on what those behaviors are that you really want, and apply them. So I'm just looking at some comments from others. So this is more a question probably to you, Jennifer. There's a question for yourself about any insights or best practices from your book regarding the use of emotional intelligence in managing performance-related conversations, handling difficult feedback sessions.
Yeah, that's actually a great application of what we're talking about today. So, when you're in a performance conversation and it's a difficult conversation, I think, sometimes it's very easy to default to that like defensive position where when you hear something, you immediately want to defend your response or defend your answer. And I think in that space, it's the ideal moment for you to choose the response that you want to have. So instead of defaulting to that, maybe that initial emotional feeling that you're having, you know, take a step, pause, and think about like how are you going to respond, right? Maybe this feedback, maybe you need to have a question about it so you can dig into it a little bit more. And in the moment when you're upset and when you're hearing something that really is disturbing, it can be very hard to take that pause. But that gets back to the emotional self-control and the emotional self-management, which is one of the dimensions of emotional intelligence. So taking a step back and thinking about, okay, this feedback that I'm being given, it may not match with my worldview. What is it that I need to do to be able to hear this in a way that I can take it in, internalize it, and then come back with a question that actually helps me understand where this is coming from and maybe what I can do differently going forward to be more effective in this space. And I haven't seen the question that the person was asking, so I'm not sure if that is actually on point. But if it isn't, go ahead and send in a follow up, and we'll go ahead and answer that for you.
Yeah, I'm also happy to dive in a little bit about that. So I've developed a framework that's called the 8 archetypes of influence. And so one of the archetypes specifically goes into performance management issues, and that is the scientist archetype. And I have a guide that I'll send in on the chat that you guys can go into. It's a free guide to be able to discover how do you give effective feedback. But really, one of the key things is that we need to observe behaviors objectively without judgment or bias. Because when we are trying to give feedback, so often it's clouded by our own opinions, our own judgments, and it makes it really hard for the other person to receive it. So instead of saying something like, why didn't you finish this project on time? You might want to think about how can I do this less judgmentally? What are the things that held up this project, using what language rather than why language? But also being able to be clear about, I had set the deadline for 5 p.m. on Tuesday. You delivered it to me on Wednesday at 6 p.m. That's not acceptable. And so being able to be, though, instead of saying like you're lazy, which is judgment or bias, you're telling them the clear, objective behavior. They turned it in a day late. And so that's going to make it easier for them to receive the feedback when you are giving it to them objectively without judgment or bias.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, when we talk about these challenges that we have in this space, separating the person from the problem is also critical, right? So you're not actually criticizing the person themselves as a human being. You are actually talking about, look, you didn't deliver that project to me on time. And that is the problem. It's not the person that's the problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great, Jen.
So maybe going to the other spectrum, what about providing feedback to high performers? How do you do that in a group setting? So if someone's really performing really well and there's a mixture of how everybody else is, how would you tackle that?
So this is where I would say it really comes down to the leader's ability to create those connections and understanding of what motivates their people. So as a leader, you should be understanding what each person prefers from a recognition and appreciation standpoint. So some people may be very comfortable with public recognition and other people may not be. And so I think key to understanding like how you would want to share, that feedback in a group setting, first you would want to understand the person that you want to give the feedback about, what is it that they prefer, right? Not what you prefer or what the company rules and regulations say you should do, but what does that person actually prefer? And then honor that and recognize them in that way, whatever they choose.
Yeah, that's so critical. And it's also important to think about the other people in the room. So what's the company culture at that time? Have other people not had wins, basically not because they weren't trying hard enough, but just by circumstance? So you want to think about how might other people's motivation be impacted. Sometimes it can be positively impacted by you publicly praising someone. And other people are like, oh, I love that they're giving, positive feedback when we do things right. Other times, if you show favoritism, it can actually negatively impact performance from everyone else because they feel like you're only giving positive praise to one person. So you really need to delicately think about what's the culture, what's the moment in time. And I still always encourage to give more positive feedback when people are performing well, because they're far more likely to continue to performing well when they know exactly what they've been doing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, sometimes there's examples of this that go viral, right? When it's done very, very poorly. So, for example, there was this one CEO who was on a virtual town hall with all of their employees, and the employees, it had been a little bit of a tough economic condition, right? And so the employees were worried about, is there going to be a bonus this year? Like, where our pay isn't keeping up with, inflation, that kind of thing. And so, when they asked this question of the CEO on the virtual town hall, the CEO, instead of, demonstrating that emotional intelligence and empathizing, and that saying that she understood that things have been challenging, and that she really appreciated, the efforts that they had done to date, she took the opposite tack. And she, chastised them basically for even asking about, bonuses in their pay in, such a difficult economic condition, and just told them that they needed to get back to working harder, and that, that would all sort itself out. And so, you know, making sure that you are handling the situation with the appropriate contextual understanding of what's going on, is also very important in that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's so important, Jennifer.
Again, some wonderful answers there. This has definitely been a little masterclass, so thank you. And maybe building on what you spoke about there, like difficult circumstances, there's lots in the media at the moment about some companies needing to do layoffs, which are very difficult conversations, both for the person giving the conversation and the one receiving it. Just wondering your thoughts about that. Like, how do you go into such a meeting where you need to give that news?
Yeah, those are such hard conversations. And, first of all, it's important to honor what your own experience is in it. I know it can be hard, but sometimes we are also feeling a lot too. And that doesn't, sometimes we feel guilty that we feel bad because we're sad that the person's going, but we know that it's going to be harder for them. And so acknowledging and giving yourself just a little bit of compassion before you have to go into one of those meetings, knowing that it's difficult, different people respond differently. So first, just giving yourself a little bit of compassion in how hard the moment is really important. And then when going into the meeting, ideally, specifically when there are layoffs and it's not about the person, it's not about their performance, being really clear that it's about the company's budget and bottom line and the position was cut, and being kind with them, being direct with them, and holding space for the feelings that might come up. Legally, there are some things that you can't get into, but trying to be the emotional person that is strong to be there with them. And then really, a lot of companies forget about their employees the day they lay them off. Try to be the leader that can still support that person once they've been laid off, connect them to other people, review their resume, do things to support them, to be there with them through that journey. Because so often what happens is an employee gets laid off and then they lose all of their community that they were just with. All of their friends, their work friendships get lost. And so as much as you can still try and be a friend to them, a support to them, connect them to other people and try and support them in their job search, that will be deeply meaningful to them.
That's really, really good again, Jess. Thank you. You got anything to add to it, Jennifer?
I think there's part of me that wants to say, look, I think, from an emotional perspective for you as the person having to deliver that messaging, give yourself some space and time before you have to do that to process that and work through that, so that, you're not coming into that session an emotional mess, right? Because we know that emotion contagion happens in milliseconds. And so as soon as you walk in, if you are in this space of like, just a hot mess, and you are not in a space where you can actually talk rationally and clearly, it's going to be so much worse for the person that you're working with on that. On the other hand, I don't think it hurts to show some humanity in that space, like Jess was talking about, right? Be firm, be direct, be kind, but it doesn't mean that you can't show emotion either from a compassion standpoint, right? And feeling for this human being whose life that you are just about to upend, and turn on its head. So I think there's that dichotomy there, but I think also being able to just give yourself that space to process, before you go in so that you can be in the right mindset to deliver the message in the kindest and most direct way possible. I think so often we want to avoid those difficult conversations. And so we maybe beat around the bush more than we should instead of just being direct. And I think that is one of the kindest things that you can do in that kind of time with that kind of conversation.
Thank you. And there's a comment came in that I think is actually pretty key as well. Just I'm wondering your thoughts about it. So there's the people, obviously there's the manager, the person losing their role, but then there's a team left behind. What's some ideas of dealing with them? Because they may feel loss, fear. What's some ways of dealing with that?
Yes, the people left behind in some ways, it's almost harder, I think, on them because not only now do they have 100% of the work to do with maybe 20% of the people, and they have a lot of feelings around that, but they're also like, Jess had mentioned, like they've just lost a colleague as well, right? They're going through essentially a grieving process, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross would talk about. So providing the proper support for them from maybe a psychological standpoint, right? Bringing on some mental health counselors or some different resources that employees can turn to in those times to help them process through those emotions and work through that grief. And then also setting up like some very clear context for, what does this new world look like? What are the expectations that we now have of you? What are the performance expectations? What are the role expectations? And what are the differences that are happening now that weren't there before so that everyone has a shared understanding of what this new world looks like and where they fit into that new world?
Absolutely. That's really important, being able to set clear guidelines. But the one thing I would say is the very first, unfortunately, I've gone through this process many times where I've been a leader at companies. We've had to lay people off, and it's been very difficult. And so the first thing to do, I suggest, is to slow down. And it seems a little counterintuitive because you've just lost a lot of people on your team and you have way more work to do than you did previously. But if you can slow down for a moment with your team, maybe give them a day off to process, maybe slow down, bump a deadline a little bit, give them a little bit of time to process. The biggest risk is moving too fast and not giving them time to process, so they're not on board. And instead, then they're searching for a job somewhere else. They're afraid, they are overwhelmed, they feel like there's no place to talk about everything that's going on, and they're looking elsewhere then. And so what you want to do is you want to provide safety for them. And that means slowing down, letting them know that they're going to give them time to process what just happened. I normally try and give my employees days off after that has happened so that they can, nourish themselves in whatever way they need to nourish themselves first. Then I would say have a meeting back together with everyone on your team. Allow them to express their frustrations, their fears, their concerns, hear them fully. We talked about this active listening skill. Let them feel heard. Acknowledge your own, maybe frustrations or fears about what's happening. And then gather them together to figure out, okay, this is the problem we're in together. We don't have as many resources. Make them part of building that solution. Don't just give them the goal and be like, we're going to go at this. Make them part of the solution. How can we figure this out together? Sarah has more work. Who can help with some of that work that she has, that she's now taking over for the two people she lost on her team? Allow everyone to collaborate together, and that will actually create more cohesion and more security as they move forward.
Some really powerful and I think emotional answers, and I think it's been your answers, both Jess and Jennifer, have really shown that even the topic is how sensitive it is, that you've demonstrated your emotional intelligence in answering it. So again, a really thank you for sharing that. I just noticed we haven't got many minutes left, so maybe one or two remaining questions. But if you're giving some advice to HR department of one, what can that person do to again help their organisation? What's the best way to help improve the influence across the organisation?
Mm.
But obviously they've got limited resources, so yeah.
Well, I think the very first thing is just starting to shift your mindset. As an HR professional, you're not in the business of just policies and procedures. You're in the business of people, and your ability to foster emotional and social intelligence is going to be your superpower. And being able to have that mindset will open up the opportunities for you to be able to see where there are opportunities for you to utilize some of your human side, some of your emotional side, to be able to support your leadership team and support the employees that you're working with.
And Jennifer, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think from a, for a HR person, I think you said, Rod, like a team of one. That's, I think in times you can feel like, wow, there's so much, right? And it's so overwhelming. But I think where the benefit of the emotional and social intelligence is that has such a ripple effect, and it can be so amplified in the organization that it gives you more bang for your buck, if you will. So from an investment standpoint, when you're looking at, how do I build the skills and capabilities of the individuals in my organization, I think one of the best places that you can put some investment dollars is on this topic of emotional and social intelligence. So whether that looks as, a course that you offer to everyone, whether it looks like, you buy a book and you help people start to build that emotional vocabulary that we were talking about, whether you look online and you find some, free resources and complimentary resources that are available to help people assess their skills. And then you have some like group conversations that bring people together to talk about where they are and where they want to go and how they might want to get there. I think there's so many different ways that you can start to build that emotional and social intelligence. And it's at a lot of different variety of price points. So I think making sure, like Jess said, that you have that growth mindset, right? That, the ways of leading and the ways of working prior to COVID particularly aren't effective anymore in this new world of work, where we have a workforce that has shifted. We have people that are demanding autonomy, that want autonomy and voice and choice in how and where and when they work. And so recognizing that and helping them get to that space through some of the, influencing and emotional intelligence and social intelligence levers is one of the best ways that you can be a talent magnet going forward and ensure that you have the top talent that you need to help your organization survive.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, thank you, Jess and Jennifer. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think I'll add that you've shared so much valuable information that, boy, a good resource will just be sharing this this panel on YouTube or something will be just amazing for people, I think. So yeah, thank you for those who listened today, and I really look forward to the next panel, and I'm looking forward to hopefully joining Jess and Jennifer on future panels as well. So thanks everyone. And that's the end of the panel today. So thank you.
Thank you all so much.